Hello and welcome to Marvel in a Minute, presented by Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Peter, and I am a Marvel zombie. I've been reading Marvel for over 25 years, and more recently I've been reading just about every in-continuity Marvel comic book from 2012, the end of the Heroic Age, the beginning of Marvel Now, through present. So as I'm reading all of these comic books every week, I thought, hey, why not get on and talk about all of the comic books, except for that, if you were friends with me and could just sit in a room and do it with me, would take potentially hours, because Marvel puts out between 10 and 25 new comic books most weeks of the year. So to put a little bit of a limit on that and to make it a little bit of a game show where you watch me stumble all over myself, I give myself exactly 1 minute to talk about each one of Marvel's new comic books out this week. And I don't script ahead of time what I'm going to say. I kind of read the issue, I take a couple of notes to help with my memory, since there's so many, but I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it. So let's dig right in and talk about all of the Marvel comics out this week, Wednesday, September 26th. Amazing Spider-Man issue number 6 was written by Nick Spencer with pencils from Humberto Ramos, inks from Victor Olabaza, colors from Edgar Delgado, letters from Joe Caramagna, and a cover from Humberto Ramos and Edgar Delgado. Here we go. You know, I had a little bit of impatience with the initial arc of Nick Spencer's Spider-Man. It felt very small, and now that we're to this 6th issue, which works as a one-shot but also kicks off the next arc, I'm starting to see that he's really focused on bringing Peter Parker and Spider-Man back to the street level. You know, Spencer, part of his breakout at Marvel was writing the Superior Foes of Spider-Man in Marvel Now, which took a look at a lot of B-list ex-Spider-Man villains, current Spider-Man villains, and kind of how they kind of just trundled through their days, and just the threat of Spider-Man was enough to cow them. And it was a genuinely funny and enjoyable series, and this issue is kind of a sequel to that. It even has a guest art appearance from Steve Lieber, who drew a lot of that series, and because Peter Parker is roommates with one of those Superior Foes, Boomerang. And so we got to see a very small story about Peter playing trivia in a bar. It was kind of funny, and it shows just how small this title is at least going to start, and I think that's fine. It gives us a little bit more sense of the way that Spencer is going. That's my minutes. That's how it works, and on to the next title. Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, issue number 24, was written by Peter David with art from Bruno Oliveira, color art from Raquel Rosenberg, letters from Joe Caramagna, and a cover from Carrie Randolph and Emilio Lopez. Here we go. So this entire series has been a morality play to see if this clone of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly, could really be good or not. And so the last issue made that morality play really present, because it had Mephisto actually pull a fast one on Ben and all the people around him and say, look, I've made it look like you've done something really horrible. If you can convince these people not to kill you for an hour, you will have won and you can gain the rights to your soul back. So this issue is pretty much the chase sequence of really just the first few minutes of that hour. And it's actually pretty fun because we have Kane, who is definitely a much more morally gray spider clone, chasing Ben Reilly through Las Vegas, but the art is not quite up to a task. This feels like maybe a slightly younger artist who can't handle all of the spider setups through the issue, although he does do a good job drawing some of the Las Vegas skyline, which you kind of have to do in this title, but it's really not up to par, and it feels like this issue kind of gets wasted as a result when it really could have felt bombastic. That's it for my minute. On to the next. Black Panther issue number 4 was written by Ta-Nehisi Coates with art from Daniel Acuna, letters from Joe Sabino, cover art by Paulo Rivera and Daniel Acuna. Here we go. This is an audacious reboot of Black Panther in the far-flung future as basically like a Star Wars-esque rebellion in space. It has characters who we've said goodbye to, like Nakia and M'Baku, and it has people wondering, how does this connect to the present day of Black Panther? Well, if you're in a hurry to get those answers, this issue is not forthcoming. It is more wild space action. There's hardly anybody in comics who's looking better than Daniel Acuna right now, doing his own line art and color work. It's incredible. This issue as its own individual space rebellion story, maybe not as compelling as the first few. It's starting to very slowly draw the elements together that are starting to inform this universe, but it's not a slow issue. It's very fast moving, and I think it's really gratifying to me because it's at a very different pace than Coates was writing Black Panther previously. So that's really fun to see, and it's good that he knows that he has that room to stretch. I don't know if this is where I would pick up. I would definitely recommend starting with number 1, but they're crafting a really compelling tale of amazing hard sci-fi. Domino Annual number 1 had a number of stories in it, which means it has a huge creative team. It was written by Gail Simone, Fabian Nicieza, Dennis Hopeless, and Leah Williams, with art from Victor Ibanez, Juan Gedeon, Leonard Kirk, Natasha Bustos, and Michael Shelfer, and colors from J. David Ramos and Jesus Bertov. Here we go. There's one negative and many positives about this annual. The negative is that there's a framing sequence, and the framing sequence, it's in the middle and on the ends. And editorially, it's not really clear where it starts and stops. And then sometimes there's like a framing sequence page, and then the next story starts, and you can't tell. And I've seen a lot of people confused about it online. So it needed a little bit more of editorial like zhuzhing, which is a shame because this issue is great. I think it's a great primer for the Domino series. Like, if you weren't sure if you were going to like it, you can just read this one issue. It shows how Domino teamed up with Outlaw. It shows a hidden chapter of Cable when he was with Copycat instead of Domino. It shows Domino having some closure with Colossus, but the best story for me, and it was Leah Williams writing this reject story, which is Domino and Nightcrawler chairing a group of mutants who look unfortunate and want to talk about how they look, but there's one mutant who looks great, but she maybe is the one who's having the most unfortunate time. Terrific story, terrific fun issue, totally in keeping with Domino's tone, even though it's by several different writers, so I really dug it. Edge of Spider-Geddon issue number 4 was written by Aaron Kuder. It's also drawn by Aaron Kuder with an assist from Will Robson, with inks from Craig Young and also Will Robson, colors from Andres Mosa, letters from Corey Petit, and a cover from Aaron Kuder, and colorist Dean White. Here we go. This Edge of Spider-Geddon series has been reintroducing us to some alternate spiders that we know from Spider-Verse, but this one takes us to a more sinister alternate spider, a Norman Osborn as Spider-Man, and so his son has to ultimately kind of break in and try to dethrone him and Oscorp, and his son in this universe seems to be very good friends, maybe something more, with Peter Parker, who maybe recently has died. It's a really tense issue. It's almost like a spy thriller because he's got to break into this building, Mission Impossible style, and fight off his father. And honestly, you know, there's also a Spider-Geddon 0 out this week. This feels like the issue, the blockbuster issue that should have been Spider-Geddon 0, not that other one. That felt like it was on the edge. And kudos to Aaron Kuder, who is usually a killer illustrator. He's been doing a lot of Dugan's Guardians of the Galaxy for the past year and a half. He just is a fantastic writer, as it turns out, on this issue, and I would kind of be interested in reading creator-owned series by him at this point. Extermination issue number 3 was written by Ed Brazan, with art from Pepe Larraz, color art from Marta Gracia, letters from Joe Sabino, a cover from Mark Brooks. This series is exploring how the many time-displaced X-Men, especially the original teen X-Men, are being removed from our current time by 2 different forces. It's a really big action movie type thrill ride of an X-Men comic book. There's not a lot of content here. It's a lot of fights. There's a lot of brutal moments in it, in the X-Mansion, on a Blackbird, under the sea in Jean Grey's base, as 3 different X-Men have turned out to be sleeper agents who've been activated as towns by Ahab. This has been a really fun series. It really just feels like a huge summer action movie of X-Men. But if you're looking for more or deeper content than that, or you feel like this is issue 3 of 5, maybe it's time to start getting explanations about what's happening, that's not going to happen for you. So this is a big action thrill ride. If you've been reading it so far, you're probably going to enjoy it, but it's not the place to start. And if you've been kind of holding off from it, maybe you want to hold off all the way until it's over, because there's still not a lot of explanation happening yet in this series. Also out from Marvel this week is Infinity War (Warps), The Iron Hammer, which is a combination of Tony Stark and Thor. It is an interesting issue written by Al Ewing that kind of reimagines the origins of both of those characters, but it's an alternate pocket reality from Infinity Wars number 3, so we're not going to cover it any farther than that. Jessica Jones Chapter 3 is a Marvel Digital Original on Comixology that is actually 2 issues long, so it's really like it would be issues 5 and 6 of this series. Jessica Jones Chapter 3 was written by Kelly Thompson, with art in the first issue from Matteo De Lewis and in the second issue by Marcio Takara. Color art from De Lewis and Raquel Rosenberg, letters from Corey Petit, and a cover from Martin Simmons. Here we go. This issue, the first half of this, issue number 5, it could not have ended this Jessica Jones opening arc in any more of a satisfactory way. The art is outstanding. The story has some bite. It's funny, but it's also a little bit of a knife twist. We get to see Jessica Jones have agency. We get to see really great action, cleverness, recalling all of the stars we've seen in the previous issues, like Elsa Bloodstone and Misty Knight. It's just a heck of a lot of fun, and a really fun Jessica Jessica Jones comic book that keeps her as an investigator, but branches out from what we've seen before, not just recursively mining the same Purple Man stuff over and over again, even though it fits in well with her past cases. And it feels like Kelly Thompson finally got to the point where this feels very differentiated from her Kate Bishop Hawkeye. At the beginning, it felt a little similar. The second issue is kind of just a one-shot that's setting up what's going to be the next arc of this title, which is going to start in January. It's Luke Cage and Jessica Jones' daughter's birthday party, and a lot of mishaps happen during the day. It's a little bit more lightweight, but we needed something lightweight at a time after that pretty heavy first arc. Marvel 2-in-1 issue number 10 was written by Chip Zdarsky, with art from Raymond K. Perez, color art from Federico Blee, letters from Joe Caramagna, and a cover by Paul Renaud. Here we go. This title just had the wind sucked right out of its sails from the fact that Fantastic Four was launched by Dan Slott, and the big revelation that we felt like we were promised in this title just never happens. Not only that, but it feels like it's forced Zdarsky to take this title way off-road in terms of marooning Human Torch and Thing in some other universe's Earth so that they can just deal with something that doesn't really matter in the long term, so that Fantastic Four has room to relaunch. Not only that, not only is the story boring, but this just looks hideous because Federico Blee's colors are just not great on this title. Human Torch doesn't have any orange on him. He just looks like somebody ripped the skin off of somebody and he's just covered in musculature. It's disturbingly awful. I think disturbingly awful is a pretty good way to describe this issue. Really, I don't have a whole lot else to say for it other than it's really just sad that we have Zdarsky, who's one of the best writers at Marvel right now, who writes heart for superheroes, kind of trundling off on the sidelines writing this right now when he could be writing Fantastic Four probably a lot better than Dan Slott. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, issue number 35, was written by Brandon Montclair with art from Natasha Bustos, color art from Tamara Bonvillain, and letters from Travis Lanham, and a cover from Natasha Bustos and Rachel Orlo. Here we go. This series, I just have a mental block with it. Ever since the first issue, I just have felt like Lunella, who's Moon Girl, is portrayed as this very kind of crabby, mean, kind of bullying kid, and that there's an excuse that she's into science, but it never really gets us too far into science. Really, all we get is her shouting at a lot of people and occasionally figuring something out at the end of an arc, but not in a way we can follow along with her innovations. And then she has this punching glove that she just uses to bop a lot of people. And that describes this issue perfectly. She fights against the Wrecking Crew, which is a female member inserted, and is a boring fight. The Wrecking Crew are way too big of a group of villains for her to face, and there's really no logical way that she could beat them. There's the sheen of this being actually a Mayor Fisk Kingpin story and him having an adoptive daughter, but that's been totally lost. There's the subplot about the school needing to do well and standardized tests to stay open, but that's kind of been dropped too. The writing is just uneven, and I wouldn't really show this to a kid unless that kid was already secure and not being a mean bully, because that's all that Lunella really ever is in this title. Moon Knight issue 199 was written by Max Bemis with art from Paul Davidson, color art from Matt Milla, letters from Corey Petit, and a cover from Becky Cloonan. Here we go. This issue, we've gone over the rainbow with Moon Knight here. It's really hard to describe. We just came off of 2 issues of him dealing with this person, this villain that Bemis invented that maybe was the reason that his psyche fractured to begin with as a kid because he witnessed somebody who was so truly evil at work. And it's been getting increasingly absurdist as it goes on, and the last issue kind of felt like it ended in a certain place, and this issue doesn't pick up from there. It even kind of winks at it and says, look, just go with it. But basically it's this villain and Moon Knight just walking around in New York, and the villain taunting Moon Knight and being just in his face, in his head, trying to really confuse him. And it doesn't really track. It feels like maybe there's a misdirect coming, maybe last issue didn't end how we thought it did, or maybe this issue is all in his head anyway. But it's a very, very strange journey, and it's not as high quality as all of the Moon Knight we've had from Bemis so far. I think it's going to need some contextualization from 200 next time to help us understand it a little better. Old Man Logan, issue number 48, is written by Ed Brazon with art from Ibrahim Robertson, color art from Carlos Lopez, letters from Corey Petit, and a cover from Andrea Sorrentino. This issue finds Old Man Logan seeking out the old Maestro Hulk from his alternate future, who's here in the past, to have a final confrontation with him. He was kind of leapt off into the Canadian wilderness at the end of the arc that began with issue number 25, and he feels like Old Man Logan is kind of taking care of the remaining loose ends in his life, and this is one last loose end for him to take care of. I was not not a fan of how the issue was set up. It does a lot, spends a lot of time with old, Maestro kind of just dominating this poor, unfortunate town of Canadians, which, like, no crap, he's the Hulk, obviously, he can dominate this town. It spends a lot of attention on how he's got all the women, he's captured all the women, like, it just feels like, okay, we get it, like, men enslave and sexually assault women, yeah, they're bad guys. I don't know that we need to be hit over the head over and over again and then see that on panel. It kind of just felt disgusting. So I guess the goal was to make me feel disgusted, but in an issue that really should have been about Old Man Logan, it really wasn't about anything. Super easily skippable, and maybe we'll get a little bit more of the actual confrontation between these two characters in the next issue. Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man 310 was written and drawn by Chip Zdarsky. It is the last issue from him on this title. It also had letters from Travis Lanham and a cover from Mike McKone and colorist Dean White. This issue, to me, shows how well Zdarsky understands Spider-Man, how well he understands Marvel heroes, and just how at home he is in finding the humorous heart of this universe. Dan Slott did a very similar final issue for Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 801, and I feel like this was even better understood Spider-Man. It brought a tear to my eye. It shows somebody making a documentary about Spider-Man and how Peter Parker is kind of like worried how that might portray him maybe, but it also allows us to dive deeply into one specific life that was affected both positively and negatively by its interaction with Spider-Man. These are the small Spider-Man stories that I'm excited by and energized by and feel great, and I was kind of hoping we were going to get more of that in Spectacular, but Zdarsky did basically one huge plot followed by a 2-issue story followed by this 1-issue story. It's a shame he's not going to be around for another 5 or 10 issues to get some more of these smaller stories, and hopefully Spencer's run will go in this direction, because I think this is where a lot of people really want to see Spider-Man live. The Punisher, issue number 2, is written by Matthew Rosenberg, with art from Simon Kujanski, colors from Antonio Fabella, letters from Corey Petit, and a cover from Greg Smallwood. This issue is a lot of fun, which is not a thing that I typically associate with the Punisher. But, we came off of a huge assassination by the Punisher of a major crime guy, bad guy, at the end of the last issue, and here we see him taking it back to the streets to try to eradicate the remains of Hydra from New York. It is very satisfying, both because we want to see Hydra going after Secret Empire, just because it's fun to see the Punisher really personal and angry and in action, but then he turns out to run into a number of Marvel's defenders, including Luke Cage and Iron Fist, in a fantastic and also quite hilarious fight. The artwork in this issue is off the charts amazing. Kujanski has been great on past titles like Black Eyed Kids, but the color here from Fabella, who's one of Marvel's best colors right now, takes it to a whole other level. This issue is gorgeous. It made me linger on every page, even though it wasn't full scripted on every page, and that's a big magic trick, both by the art team and by Matthew Rosenberg as a writer. I am really into this Punisher series. Sentry, issue number 4 of 5, was written by Jeff Lemire, with art from Kim Jacinto and Joshua Cassara, color art from Rain Barreto, letters from Travis Lanham, and a cover by Kim Jacinto. This issue, I talked about Extermination kind of feeling like it was a little bit of an empty middle chapter that was just action movie. This issue feels like it was action movie too, but it feels like it was the action movie we were promised. Like, all of the guns that were set up to go off in the first and second act are now going off in the third act. We have Sentry, in real space, not in his little contained virtual world. We have Sentry in conflict with Iron Man, in conflict with Kid Sentry. We have Sentry's villain trying to contain Bob Reynolds. We have the Void showing back up. It's kind of all the thrilling stuff that was set up. I was incredibly skeptical of why Sentry was coming back at all. It felt like a character in a series that didn't have a lot of relevancy or interest behind the pitch, but, Lemire has found a very interesting little closed loop of story here that he can tell that is interesting, fun, and extends the Sentry universe a little bit further and helps us recontextualize who he is in the current Marvel continuity, and I think ultimately that's a pretty good thing. Now, the slight art change up here is a little bit jarring, but it still all looks great, and I think if you like Sentry, you could be picking up this book. Spider-Geddon issue 0 has 2 stories in it. The first one is written by Christos Gage with art from Clayton Crane, who also did the cover. The second is by Jed McKay with art from Javier Garan and colors from Israel Silva. Both are lettered by Travis Lanham. This comic book is lying to you. It is not really Spider-Geddon 0. It is really a tie-in comic for the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man game that, if I'm reading the continuity correctly, is explaining how that Spider-Man was evolved in a tertiary fashion in Spider-Verse, which then in turn is going to help us understand how he is going to get involved in Spider-Geddon. Since he didn't exist then, we have to kind of like backdoor him into that story. Now, the second story sets up a little bit of what some of those other Spider-Verse Spider-Men have been up to and how that's going to help us launch into Spider-Geddon, but it was like really brief and just tacked on at the end, and ultimately felt like that story should have probably been written by Christos Gage, since he's the one who's going to be writing Spider-Geddon. So this kind of just felt a little bit strange and out of place, and really felt like probably could have been marketed even better if it was set as a tie-in to the video game, because honestly it made me interested in the story of the video game and the alternate version of Spider-Man there. It's well done. It just doesn't really feel like it has anything to do with Spider-Geddon. Who knows, maybe it will. Spider-Man Deadpool issue number 39 was written by Robbie Thompson, with pencils from Jim Toh, inks from Sean Parsons and Jim Toh, as well as Keith Champagne, colors from Andrew Crossley and Jim Campbell, and letters from Joe Sabino. The cover is by Dave Johnson. Here we go. This is the end of a 3-issue arc that finds Spider-Man, Deadpool, and their ward, the Matrix Man or Matrix Boy, in the Savage Land, fighting the Wrecking Crew, and I don't know what else to say about it, really. It's not especially funny. It kind of just really stretches out this story, which felt like it was going to be about Spider-Man and Deadpool kind of being somewhat father figures in a way that was going to connect to them being father figures in the whole first half of this title by Joe Kelly. But it just ends in some dumb gags. Like, Deadpool gets bitten in half in a gag by a T-Rex that's meant to reflect the guy in the bathroom in the first Jurassic Park movie, but then Deadpool is just like from a torso up and he's like hopping around just with his abs for the rest of the issue. Like, the gags just all go sideways, and it's a good looking issue, but it doesn't really feel like it got us anywhere, and this whole arc kind of has just felt like filler without a really clear direction, which is weird because all of Thompson's run before this has been outstanding. Venom First Host, issue 5 of 5, was written by Mike Costa, with pencils from Mark Bagley and Paco Diaz, inks from Andrew Hennessy and Paco Diaz, colors from Dano Sanchez Almada, and letters from Clayton Cowles. The covers by Mark Bagley and Richard Isanove. This issue is paced a little bit strangely, so we get the big space showdown finale between Eddie Brock and, the Skrull and the Kree that have been fighting this whole time, and that ends pretty early and in very kind of a pat way. Good, but quickly. And so then we get back to Earth and you're like, wow, there's 10 more pages on Earth. And then it turns out that no, we're going to get one more conflict here on Earth. So the pacing was a little bit weird, and we get Eddie Brock, again, like it almost feels like this was written for Flash Thompson at points instead of Eddie Brock. At one point, Eddie Brock like leaps out of a high-story window of a building without the symbiote on his body and falls to the ground in a fight, and he's like relatively fine. It kind of just, limps across the finish line. Not Brock. He should be limping, but he's not. Ultimately, this added some interesting things to the Venom mythos, I guess, and it gets his little child symbiote out of the way so that Donny Cates doesn't need to deal with it in this title, but I kind of would have been more interested in what Donny Cates had to do with it than ultimately what happened to it here. X-Men Blue issue number 36, the final issue of this title, is written by Colin Bunn, with art from Marcus Toh, color art from Matt Milla, letters from Joe Caramagna, and a cover from R.B. Silva and Matt Milla. Here we go. Last issue of X-Men Blue is one of my picks of the week. It felt big, emotional, and like we really earned these final moments with the X-Men. This issue does not. It ties up 3 small loose ends that didn't need to be tied up from this run, and doesn't really give us anything. Any insight into the characters, even these loose ends, they're the kind of things that maybe years from now fans would have been like, oh, I wonder why we didn't see blah. But there were nothing we really needed to see on the page. It really feels like it's just playing for time, which is disappointing because that last issue was so strong. It feels like that could have been the final issue, and we could have had one more issue with Magneto, which was actually a really interesting plot. But it is what it is. So luckily it looks great. Marcus Toh has been a fantastic artist for this series, and his colors with Matt Milla, really, it's another fantastic art team this week, and I hope we're going to continue to see him in X-Men books. But ultimately, this doesn't give you any hint of where this Extermination, or where this X-Men Blue team is going, because all of those hints are in Extermination, and that just starts cold with issue number 1. So you don't need to read this to read that, and in fact, I think if you had read X-Men Blue 35, it's the perfect summation of their time in the present day. X-Men Red issue number 8 was written by Tom Taylor, with art from Carmen Carnero, color art from Rain Barreto, letters from Corey Petit, and a cover from Jenny Frazan. Here we go. I am somebody who's really into politics and social justice in comic books. I think they're a huge part of the medium and have been ever since its invention back in the golden age with early heroes like Superman and Captain America. So please understand me when I tell you that I think this title is wasting its time trying to shoehorn in social justice messages into the voices of X-Men who would talk about this stuff anyway, but not in the on-the-nose, pound-you-over-the-head fashion that we're getting from this script. I felt that way in all 5 of the first 5 issues. Then we kind of got away from it a little bit in issues 6 and 7. I was like, finally, big, bold X-Men action. And then this issue like has a huge part that's just a monologue about how internet trolls are evil and we're going to harness their power to show the bullies what's what. It's just so on the nose, and we get it. The X-Men feel like that, obviously. Maybe you don't need to make it quite as stated as that. The action in this issue, not as clear, not as interesting, but the art is incredible. We've found a new superstar in this run. Now I have 2 more minutes to give you 2 picks. One is for my top pick of a single issue for the week, and the other is my pick for the series you must catch up on if you've got some time to sit down and read some comic books. I've got 1 minute for each of those picks. So here we go with my pick of the week. I don't do this at all ahead of time, so I really only have a minute to do it. Honestly, I don't know if you could tell from my reviews, but I did not like many of the comic books this week at all. I think this is an easy pick. It's Spectacular Spider-Man 310. Zdarsky just nails it. It's everything you'd want from Spider-Man. It works as a single issue. It brings a tear to your eye. It's just great. I don't even need the full minute. It was 30 seconds at the end. The thing I'll add is it's fun to see Zdarsky illustrating too. You know, he's a great illustrator. He's on Sex Criminals. I think he maybe did 1 or 2 issues when he was on Howard the Duck, but he's a fantastic artist. And it's crazy to think that he writes these amazing scripts and then has the time to also illustrate. Like, it must take him so long to write these scripts as tight and as joke-filled as they are, and I can't imagine how long it takes him to illustrate an issue with art of this caliber and quality, even though he does play a couple tricks during the issue to kind of like speed it along with similar setups and framing. It's still beautiful. So easy pick. All right, so now we've got to do the series that I think that you should catch up on. Do you notice I get really nervous whenever I do this? If you're watching, I'm always like pulling my ears and like scratching my neck, and it's just because like it puts me on the spot. Well, in terms of issues that I guess I have to pick a series where the issue is good in order to want to catch up on it. I think it's got to be Jessica Jones. I was really skeptical at the beginning, like this was just going to be non-junior Kate Bishop, like senior Kate Bishop, but the art has proved to be amazing throughout the series, and it just really, Kelly Thompson brought it home. Like, it was a great story. It had a great ending. The end connected to the beginning. It felt like a good payoff. The action was good. Like, it had all those satisfying things, and I think that, you know, I am fully in support of these Marvel Digital Originals. I think it's great to take characters who maybe can only sell 15 to 25,000 copies per issue in the direct market and put them on a digital platform and send to all those readers there, and then maybe try to pull in some readers that are fans of the characters from other media. Whether you're Jessica Jones fans from the comics or from Netflix, this has been outstanding. One of my favorite arcs from Marvel this year. Definitely worth tuning in for. That is it for this week's Marvel in a Minute. There were 3 other issues out from Marvel this week. Old Man Hawkeye and a pair of Star Wars issues. Star Wars and also Poe Dameron. I don't review those. So thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully this helps orient you to what is going on in the Marvel Universe. If you're a Marvel zombie like me who's trying to read everything, or maybe just somebody who's looking to dip your toe in, hopefully it gives you a few parts to get your feet wet. So thank you so much for listening to Marvel in a Minute, presented by Crushing Comics. I've been your host, Peter, and Excelsior.